Whiteness, Scientific Interventions, Aesthetics, and Representations in Fred Wilson's Met of the Muse. Fred Wilson's Met of the Muse is a sculptural depiction of antiquity juxtaposed with a sculptural depiction of Kemetic culture. A visual binary opposition is constructed by Wilson, and this complementation signifies notions of masculinity and femininity, as well as blackness and whiteness. Wilson's juxtaposed sculptures visually deconstruct notions of whiteness and aesthetics, but more importantly, they visually signify the relationship between the ideals of aesthetics and scientific interventions in the general production of Euro-white epistemologies and visual foundations of intellectualism in Euro-white culture. Thus, the connection between whiteness, aesthetics, and science is cultural, in which Christendom chronologically ties them together. Therefore, the construction of these sculptures thematically centers important notions of whiteness. Over the course of Euro-white histories, disciplines seemingly unrelated to science use the scientific method in the construction and delivery of arguments, citing evidence and methods to forward notions. Stuart Hall states that there are three major eras of social and human classification: religion, anthropologies, and sciences. That is, religious classification, specifically Euro-white Christendom, predate anthropologies and scientific epistemologies. Therefore, Christendom's social and human classification systems are constitutive of anthropology and the sciences, and the same goes for anthropology and its relationship to the sciences. It's important to note that the doctrine of discovery of 1452 by the Christian papacy granted European monarchs the blessing of the Church to invade and conquer non-Christian, non-Euro-white lands. This doctrine of discovery established a legal, socio-political, religious, and moral justification for the establishment of the imperial white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. In addition, this declaration inevitably asserts a social hierarchy between the Euro-white monarchies and the rest of the supposedly undiscovered world, a relationship that has continued to perpetuate monolithic notions of primitivity and civility in the contemporary era in the context of blackness and whiteness. This is relevant to Euro-white productions of knowledge, like the visuals referenced in the Mete of the Muse, because the historical narratives of science and the cultural function of science. As Hall asserts, the cultural function of science is to guarantee the absolute difference between those who are culturally and ethnically different. Therefore, science is a tool of naturalization, in which scientific interventions assert what is true. Different fields of science then collectively produce ways to seemingly simplify making meaning in the world. There are five major disciplines of science. Chemistry is a science of characterization and synthesis, producing knowledge of what is right, and what is wrong. Biology and anthropology produce knowledge and methods of physical differentiation, producing knowledge on human aesthetics and beauty. Physics produces knowledge on ideological constructions of the universe, but more importantly, what is a product of nature or culture. Mathematics produces knowledge on rationale for physical phenomena, and most recently, computer science constructs systems which produce algorithms that simplify rationale for making meaning of physical phenomena. All these disciplines share a common historical narrative based in the imperial white supremacist capitalist patriarchy and Christendom. Wilson's sculptures juxtapose these conflations and notions through representing blackness, Africanness, whiteness, and Europeanness on the same metaphorical and physical stage, the Muse. Starting with the platform both sculptures are standing on, a white marble-like plaster alludes to the highbrow or elitist art space that both sculptures are encompassing. While the white sculpture complements the color of this platform, the black-colored sculpture starkly contrasts this. This juxtaposition signifies a relationship between the idealistic classical antiquity, the museum or the muse, and ancient Kemetic culture. By physically placing these two sculptures on the same platform, Wilson interrogates Euro-white definitions of high culture and recenters the historical narrative of antiquated idealism to a more inclusive, multicultural, Afro-diasporic tone. Sculptures produced by artists of antiquity were considered scientifically and aesthetically pleasing. That is, their construction is constitutive of Euro-white ideals of the human body. The visual contrast between blackness and whiteness provokes thought about how this binary opposition is also a gendered one. The masculinity-femininity juxtaposition is important to discuss because whiteness and blackness transcend gender. Whiteness as a color often signifies purity, cleanliness, simplicity, and sophistication. Consequently, white femininity in antiquity is equated with these connotations and often signifies reason, aesthetical beauty, idealism, and intellectualism. Blackness as a color is in direct contrast to this. Blackness often signifies fear, overwhelm, and evil, while also signifying sophistication, elegance, and power. Kemetic sculptures of the ancient royalty were often symbolic of the power and sophistication of the monarchies and their respective geopolitical spheres of influence. Wilson's juxtaposition of the black masculine Kemetic sculpture to the white feminine antiquated sculpture evokes sophistication and power, deconstructing monolithic, modern, and contemporary representations of blackness. This is important to contrast to hegemonic Euro-white representations of blackness that often evoke anger, aggression, fear, and evil, or death in their constitutive constructions to whiteness. The low gaze of the white feminine sculpture, contrasted with the tall, royal, Kemetic sculpture, signifies a shift in the socio-political relationship between blackness, masculinity, whiteness, and femininity. This complementation of the black Kemetic sculpture to the white feminine sculpture asserts new historical narratives of Kemetic prowess, power, and idealism. Most importantly, this physical construction signifies a tall and empowered black sculpture, while the white sculpture is posing lower and exposing her body. This is important because Africanness and blackness, as represented sculpturally in the modern era, often have represented black feminine sculptures, similarly to the way the white sculpture in the Mete the Muse was represented. A good example here of Daniel Chester's representing Africa in front of the National Museum in New York. The Meta the Muse is in binary opposition to the audience it's presented to, and evokes notions of satire as well. This binary opposition exists because the sociopolitical relationship between black masculinity, white femininity, as represented in contemporary media, portrays white femininity above all femininity, and whiteness above blackness, both through the representational practices such as colorism, as well as the figurative placement of the bodies in the frames. The satire finally exists because the viewer looks upon a world in which the way black Kemetic masculinity and white femininity are complemented idealistically is far, far from the truth of the contemporary hegemony of the media entertainment complex.